And there was a part of me that wanted to apologize for that because I was a lady and you know, everyone wanted to see me in that light. But pretty tough was my mentality, and I didn't apologize for it.
The clay courts of the Madrid Open have seen legends fall. They have never seen anything quite like this. April 2026, Alex Eala, the 20-year-old Filipina, trained inside Rafael Nadal's own academy, ranked inside the WTA Top 100, and the first Filipino woman to win a WTA title, stepped onto that Madrid clay for her return, and the crowd erupted before she hit a single ball. The tournament felt it. The WTA started making calls. Then somebody made a decision, not on the court, behind closed doors. A quiet, calculated move to shrink her platform, her media access, her visibility, her moment, at the exact tournament where she was outshining everything around her. It was the kind of move designed to leave no fingerprints. Maria Sharapova found the fingerprints. A 5-time Grand Slam champion who spent 2 decades inside the machine that was now targeting Eala recognized the blueprint instantly. And she didn't whisper about it. She went off on the WTA in front of everyone. If you're not subscribed yet, fix that right now. Because what Sharapova said next changed this conversation permanently. So what exactly did they try to silence? And why does it terrify them so much?
I mean, that's an honest truth to like getting to the top, is that it takes mental fortitude and not shying away from it, accepting those challenges. And
to understand that, you need to go back to who Alex Eala actually is. Not the highlight reel version, the real version. She was born in 2005 in the Philippines, a country that has produced world-class boxers, basketball players, and billiards champions, but had never once sent a woman deep into the machinery of professional tennis. Not at the level Eala reached, not even close. She was 14 years old when the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca opened its doors to her. 14. While most kids her age were figuring out high school, she was training on the same clay that shaped one of the greatest tennis minds the sport has ever produced. That detail matters, because it tells you this was never an accident. This was a deliberate, years-long construction of a weapon. By the time she turned professional, the tennis world already had her on a watch list. She was winning ITF titles before most players her age had figured out how to handle tour pressure. She captured the 2024 Monster title and announced herself as something the WTA could no longer afford to ignore. The ranking points followed. The fan base exploded, not just in the Philippines, but across Southeast Asia, across every community that had been waiting decades for a player who looked like them to stand inside the draw of a serious WTA tournament and compete as she belonged there. Because she didn't just belong, she started winning. And that is precisely where the story gets complicated. The Madrid Open is not a small tournament. It is one of the most prestigious clay events on the entire WTA calendar, a WTA 1000, which means maximum ranking points, maximum media infrastructure, maximum global visibility. The names that have graced those courts read like a Hall of Fame shortlist. It is the kind of stage where reputations are built permanently.
Let's go, Alex!
Hey, I'm Alex. I just finished my practice and come spend the day with me.
When Eala arrived in Madrid for her return in April 2026, she carried something most players at that tournament simply do not have. A fan base that was genuinely, emotionally invested in her every move. Not casually interested, invested. The kind of support that fills stands, trends on social media within minutes of a match ending, and turns a tennis tournament into something that feels like a national event for an entire country 10,000 kilometers away. The tournament infrastructure was noticed. Of course it did. Here is where the reports start getting uncomfortable. According to sources close to the situation, decisions were allegedly made around Eala's scheduling, media allocation, and promotional visibility that her camp found deeply inconsistent with her ranking and her draw position. The specific details remain contested. The WTA has not issued any formal acknowledgement of a complaint. But the pattern being described, if accurate, follows a template that players and insiders have quietly referenced for years. A rising player gets hot, The tournament has its own commercial priorities, its own preferred narratives, its own relationships with sponsors and broadcasters that predate the new arrival. And sometimes, allegedly, the infrastructure bends in ways that are not entirely coincidental. This is not unique to Eala. It is not unique to Madrid, but the timing made it explosive. Because Maria Sharapova was watching. To understand why her reaction carried so much weight, you need to understand what Sharapova actually represents inside professional tennis. Not as a nostalgic figure, not as a retired champion doing press appearances, but as someone who has lived inside every dark corridor of this sport's institutional politics. She won 5 Grand Slam titles. She spent years ranked #1 in the world. She built a business empire while competing at the highest level. And then, in 2016, she tested positive for meldonium, a substance that had just been added to the banned list. And the tennis establishment moved on her with a speed and severity that many in the sport considered disproportionate. She served a 15-month ban. She came back, she competed again. She retired on her own terms in 2020. That entire arc gave Sharapova something most tennis ambassadors and board members simply do not have: a bone-deep personal understanding of what it feels like when the institution decides you are inconvenient. When the infrastructure that is supposed to support professional athletes quietly shifts its weight against you instead. She has felt that. She knows its texture. So when she allegedly looked at what was reportedly unfolding around Eala at the Madrid Open, a young woman at the beginning of the career Sharapova had at the end, facing institutional friction at the exact moment her star was rising. The recognition was reportedly immediate, and according to sources, she did not file a quiet complaint. She did not request a private meeting. She did not send a carefully worded statement through a publicist. She allegedly went off. The word "went off" is doing a lot of work in that sentence, and it deserves unpacking. This was not reported as a polished diplomatic critique. The characterization from sources close to the situation describes a direct, unapologetic, named confrontation. Sharapova specifically targeting the WTA's handling of Eala's situation and framing it as exactly the kind of institutional maneuver she had personally experienced and recognized. A 5-time slam champion using her credibility, her platform, and her history as ammunition in a public argument with the governing body of women's tennis. That is not a small thing. The WTA has spent years carefully managing its public image around player welfare, diversity, and the development of emerging talent from non-traditional tennis markets. The organization has made deliberate, visible investments in expanding the sport's footprint across Asia and Southeast Asia specifically. Eala, a Filipino champion trained at a world-class European academy, was in many ways the living proof of that investment working. She was the success story. Which is exactly why Sharapova's alleged intervention hit the way it reportedly did, because she wasn't accusing the WTA of ignoring a fringe player. She was allegedly accusing them of undermining the very talent that their own developmental narrative depended on. That is a contradiction that is genuinely difficult to spin away. You cannot simultaneously market yourself as the organization championing the next generation of global tennis talent and then allegedly work to reduce that talent's visibility at one of your flagship events.
Does really well, and I think there's a lot of things that make her opponents feel very uncomfortable.
The logic collapses publicly the moment someone with Sharapova's credibility points at it directly. The Filipino tennis community responded with volcanic intensity. Social media timelines across the Philippines lit up within hours. The hashtags were not polite. The commentary was not measured. Fans who had been following Eala's career from her earliest ITF matches, who had woken up at 3 in the morning to watch her compete in European time zones, who had carried her name across platforms for years before the mainstream tennis press started paying attention, those fans felt this story as a personal provocation.
Yes. And she's humble and she works hard.
Yes.
That's why we like her, you know, because she's a...
The narrative was not abstract to them. The idea that their player at a major WTA 1000 tournament was allegedly being managed down rather than elevated. That landed differently for a fan base that has spent years fighting for recognition inside a sport that has historically centered its commercial energy on a very specific geography. And Sharapova, intentionally or not, became their voice inside that fight. That dynamic is worth sitting with for a moment. Because it reveals something about where the real tension in this story lives. This is not simply a dispute between a retired champion and a governing body. It is a collision between two different visions of what professional women's tennis is supposed to look like in 2026. One vision is the established commercial infrastructure, the tournament hierarchies, the broadcaster relationships, the legacy narratives built around European and American stars that have historically driven the sport's revenue. The other vision is the one Eala physically represents, a genuinely global sport, drawing talent and audiences from markets that were invisible to tennis 20 years ago, demanding equal treatment not as a gesture of inclusion, but as a commercial and competitive reality. Sharapova, who built her own brand across exactly those kinds of global markets during her playing career, allegedly understood instinctively which side of that argument she was standing on. The WTA has remained publicly quiet on the specifics. No formal statement addressing the reported treatment of Eala at the Madrid Open has been issued at the time of this script. No acknowledgement of Sharapova's alleged intervention has come from the organization's official channels. That silence is its own kind of statement. In a media environment where governing bodies routinely issue rapid responses to public controversies, choosing not to respond to a claim made by a five-time Grand Slam champion about the treatment of a ranked player at a WTA 1000 event is a decision, not an oversight. What it signals and what sources suggest is still unresolved behind closed doors is that the WTA has no clean answer to the question Sharapova allegedly put on the table. Because if the reported treatment of Eala is accurate, defending it publicly is impossible. And denying it invites the kind of detailed scrutiny that leads to documents, scheduling records, and internal communications that no organization wants, surfaced in a public dispute. So the silence continues. Meanwhile, Alex Eala keeps competing. That detail matters more than anything else in this story. Whatever was allegedly attempted in Madrid, whatever moves were reportedly made to reduce her moment, to manage her visibility, to clip the size of the space she was allowed to occupy, it did not stop her from stepping onto that court and performing. The player who came through the Rafa Nadal Academy, who became the first Filipino woman to win a WTA title, who climbed into the WTA Top 100, not through wildcards and favorable draws, but through the accumulation of match wins against professional opposition. That player showed up in Madrid and did what she has always done. She made it impossible to look away. And that is ultimately why this story will not die quietly the way the WTA might prefer. Because at the center of it is a 20-year-old who is genuinely, undeniably good enough that any attempt to minimize her presence reads as exactly what Sharapova allegedly called it, an institutional choice, not a logistical coincidence. The better Eala performs, the more visible the contradiction becomes. Every match she wins, every crowd she pulls, every social media trend she generates across Southeast Asia makes the reported Madrid situation look worse in retrospect, not better. Sharapova understood that calculus when she allegedly decided to speak. A rising player being quietly managed down is a story that fades. A rising player being quietly managed down while a five-time Grand Slam champion publicly calls it out. That is a story that compounds. Every week Eala spends inside the top 100, every tournament she enters, every time a Filipino crowd somewhere in the world screams her name, the question Sharapova allegedly put to the WTA gets louder. Why did you try to silence her? That question does not have a good answer, and the longer the organization stays quiet, the more the silence itself becomes the answer. The tennis world is watching how this resolves.
Of course, we have to mention Alex Eala, the incredible fandom coming, across the globe, especially from the Filipino community. So,
players inside the locker room are watching. Sponsors building their next generation of partnerships with the WTA are watching. Broadcasters who need Southeast Asian audiences to justify their rights fees are watching. Everyone who has a stake in what professional women's tennis looks like in the next decade is paying close attention to how the governing body handles the moment a legend called them out for how they treated the sport's most exciting new face. This is bigger than one tournament. It is bigger than one scheduling dispute or one media allocation decision. It is a stress test for whether the WTA actually means what it says about building a truly global sport, or whether that language is a marketing position that evaporates the moment a player from outside the traditional commercial centers gets big enough to disrupt the existing order. Maria Sharapova forced that question into the open. Alex Eala, simply by being as good as she is, makes it impossible to close. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of what's at stake here, for Eala, for Filipino tennis, for every player who has ever been made to feel smaller than their talent deserves, then subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the notification bell. Because this conversation is not finished. The WTA still hasn't answered, Sharapova hasn't backed down, and Eala hasn't stopped winning. We will be here every time this story develops, with the full picture, the real context, and zero interest in letting the people in power run out the clock on this quietly. Subscribe, you are going to want to be here for what comes next.